Greetings. It is Monday, December 14th, 2020. My name is Akiva Segan. I'm an American Jewish artist and guest tolerance educator. Best known for art portraying a Holocaust, victims of the Holocaust and of fascism in Europe, 1930s through war's end in 1945, and for human rights art. And yesterday, while going through a box of papers, I came across an issue I had saved on a visit to Boston of the Jewish Advocate, like Jewish community newspaper published in Boston. The issue published February 25th, 2011. And yesterday afternoon, I reread this article called Challenge at Auschwitz, Teaching a New Generation the Lessons of Shoah. And I found it a very interesting read. Shoah, or the Shoah, is the Hebrew word for the Holocaust. And it was written by a late American Jewish writer, columnist, professor named Leonard Fein, who was born in, I believe, in Brooklyn, New York in 1934. He passed on at age 80 in 2014, 6 years ago. And I, for many years, starting in early 1990s, I was a subscriber to the then weekly English language newspaper called The Forward. 2 or 3 years ago, it became they changed it to like a quarterly magazine. But I read the weekly for years, and I remember his very last column, which was published posthumously like a week or so after he died. And I was very moved by, I'm going to read an excerpt from that column, published August 16th, 2014. Then I'm going to read the column he wrote about Auschwitz that was published in 2011. Then I'm going to briefly show 4 drawings I've done, one on site at the Auschwitz death camp, which I visited 2 different times, 1984 and then again in 1985. So first, I'm going to read the excerpt from a column he wrote on August 16, 2014, published after he died. I was in Citero. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly. It's S as in Sam, D as in David, E-R-O-T, a town in by the Negev, I believe, in kind of like southwest Israel facing Gaza. I was in Citero, which for years was the prime target of rockets from Gaza. A friend who was there explained to me that all the children of Citero suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder. All of them. As it happens, I was in Gaza the very next day chatting with a prominent psychiatrist who explained to me that all the children of Gaza suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder. Sorry, Fein wrote. They were both wrong. This is not a post-anything. The trauma goes on, seething daily. Now and not so rarely then boiling over, scalding tens, hundreds, thousands of people. What we have is ongoing traumatic stress disorder, then in uppercase letters OTSD, ongoing traumatic stress disorder. That's the part of the column which I excerpted, and the whole column can be read online in the Forward website. I'll attach the URL in my text description with this video. So now I'm going to read his column that was published in the Jewish Advocate, and it was probably also concurrently published in the Forward, then a weekly newspaper published from New York. Challenge at Auschwitz, Teaching a New Generation the Lessons of Shoah. On an average day in 2010, nearly 3,800 people visited Auschwitz, up from about 1,200 a day in the year 2000. Such numbers jar me, since my vivid recollection of my own life-changing visit in 1973 is that in addition to the 42 folks I was traveling with, there were no more than 100 or so others milling about. The idea of Auschwitz as a tourist attraction is less than implausible. It is disruptive. We learned the current numbers from Piotr Savinsky, director of the Auschwitz-Birkenau State Museum, who is quoted extensively in a New York Times article February 18th that reports on plans to change the visitor's experience to enrich and deepen it. As Savinsky puts it, quote, "It's not enough to cry. Empathy is noble, but it's not enough," end of quote. Fein continues, "We cried, we sobbed, we wept, we clung to each other for support. Before the war, Auschwitz I had been a Polish army barracks, 2-story red brick buildings, not unattractive. Now in each there was one of what have by now become iconic exhibits." I just want to make sure the camera iPod doesn't turn off here. Iconic exhibits: glass cases filled with shoes, with human hair, with prostheses, with suitcases, with brushes of every kind, with eyeglasses, and here among the shoes a wooden shoe. And suddenly a world is conjured, a Dutch woman, and there amid the hair an intricate blonde braid, personhood preserved. And rack upon rack of talisim, prayer shawls, enough to prompt the tears. And then a space between the barracks, a freestanding wall, quote unquote, the wall of death, where, so we were told, prisoners, mainly intellectuals from Krakow, were shot, the crisper path to death than the gas chambers and crematoria. And only then, yet another barrack, yet another glass-encased exhibit, this time on the second floor, a glass case of modest proportion, coffee table shape and size, and beneath the glass, babies' pacifiers. I'll show this towards the end, a drawing I did seated on the ground at Auschwitz I on that first visit, July 29th, 1984, that I made to the Auschwitz death extermination camp site and Birkenau. Okay. And it was not until 1991, in a speech by then Senator Bill Bradley, that I learned of what Richard Wright, the author of Native Son, had observed about that novel some years after it was published. Quote, "I found that I had written a book that even the banker's daughter could read and weep over and feel good about. I swore to myself that if I ever wrote another book, no one would weep over it. That would be so hard and deep that they would have to face it without the consolation of tears," end of quote. Some sense of that was with us on that drizzly day at Auschwitz, for the tears stopped when our guide told us that the Jewish pavilion was closed for repairs. We insisted, and he finally went off to fetch the key to a building as unprepossessing outside as in, the shabbiest room we'd been in, dusty, nondescript exhibits, too dilapidated to evoke desolation, until, off in the corner, we came across a cheap copy of Picasso's Guernica, and quite suddenly new context became available, not as replacement for the more immediate obvious, but alongside it. Odd that a cheap print enhances the authenticity of the place. For above all else, Auschwitz, perhaps more than any other place on earth, embodies authenticity. No masks or disguises, no rhetorical flourishes, no formulaic consolation or comfort. There is no comfort. Auschwitz is not a symbol, it is a cemetery. But it is now 66 years since Auschwitz was liberated, and new generations must be helped to find their own way into learning what happened there and why such learning matters. That is what the new plans, supported by Poland, Germany, Austria, and the United States, are meant to accomplish. Piotr Savinsky is just 39 years old, yet the memory and the lessons that need learning seem safe in his hands. This is what he says, quote, "More or less 8 to 10 million people go to such exhibitions around the world today. They cry, they ask why people didn't react more at the time, why there were so few righteous. Then they go home, see genocide on television, and don't move a finger. They then ask themselves why they are not righteous themselves, end of quote. That is not an easy question for us to ask ourselves, nor is it only genocide that ought to prompt such questions. The experience of Auschwitz itself, the trail of tears that preceded the arrivals, and the disposition of the people after the slaughter were all elements in a program of dehumanization that became quite routine. While the Shoah belongs to us, the Jews, we do not own it. In parentheses, nor must we allow it to own us, end of parentheses. It remains fundamentally incomprehensible, though all the scholarship and the memoirs and the testimonials in the museums are gifts of inestimable value. We can study and we can learn, but in the end, all that we know for certain is that the battle against dehumanization must be waged every day, everywhere. Thank you, Mr. Leonard Fein of blessed memory. And I'm just going to quickly mention a couple of things he wrote. I bring to mind some words I've read, for example, about when he wrote "No Mask or Disguises," brings to mind the paintings and drawings of murdered German Jewish painter Felix Nussbaum, which I will recommend people view on the internet. He and his wife Felka, who was Jewish from Warsaw, spent several years in hiding in Brussels, Belgium. They were in the last transport of Jewish prisoners from Brussels to Auschwitz, where they were both murdered. Fein also mentioned there was no comfort. Auschwitz is not a symbol, it is a cemetery. And Elie Wiesel wrote about, in a book called Harry James Cargus, in conversation with Elie Wiesel, Wiesel spoke about symbols and cemeteries and Jewish victims going up in smoke. There were no cemeteries and so on. Anyway, Harry James Cargus is a late American Catholic educator. Okay, on to several works of mine. This one I mentioned, I drew actually in black and white, and later back in Seattle after I got home from that first 6 weeks in Poland, I drew more on it in color, added some rubber stamps, which also got colored with colored pencil, and I added a lot of writing. And then I made this artified mat, which has rubber stamps and some pieces from postmarks from cards and letters I had sent people while I was in Poland. It was a very moving experience to me, myself, when I was at Auschwitz and then at Birkenau the later that day. I actually wrote an article about that, which is unpublished. I will go through a filing cabinet and see if I can find it. This is a drawing I did in my Under the Wings Holocaust and Victims of Fascism Year art series. It depicts a Jehovah's Witness prisoner, number 190377, from a photograph I saw in a book. I got at the library about Jehovah's Witnesses and their persecution and murder by the Nazi, the Third Reich. This is actually the only work that's actually like a study in the entire series, which has over 70 works now. Metaphoric, like allegorical wings here. This is Under the Wings. I have to look up the number. I think it was 77, might be 71. I'm getting reflection. Sorry about that. Turn this a little bit. It's called the Sea Monsters and the Martyrdom of Anna Maria Satella Steinbeck. She was a 10-year-old Sinti girl from the Netherlands, It's called the Martyrdom by the Third Reich in the Church of Anna Maria Satella Steinbeck, age 10, of the Netherlands, a Sinti girl. And drawing in there, the frame I actually bought at Goodwill, at a Goodwill store, and it worked perfectly for the drawing. I did the drawing to fit the frame size-wise. We have metaphoric or allegorical sea monsters here. 4 of them. 1, 2, oh, 3, sorry. Long 1, 2, 3, 4. The drawing I did from a still photo from a film that was taken by a Jewish prisoner. Her looking out a train window. It's a very famous photo from the film about of deportation of prisoners. And this drawing I did in 2006, not part of the Under the Wing series. I drew it from a photograph in the Auschwitz album. I'm getting a lot of reflection here. Let me move this here and see if reflection's a bit better. And the photograph of the book, the Auschwitz album, which were photographs taken by, I believe it was might have been a German officer, of arrivals at Auschwitz in 1944. The last Jewish prisoners who arrived were Hungarian, and everyone in the photographs were Hungarian Jewish prisoners, most of whom were murdered, annihilated. And the title of the drawing is this grandmother and the children are really enjoying their holiday walk to the Auschwitz gas chambers. The title, which might astonish people, is actually derived from a sentence in a book by the late Hungarian Jewish Holocaust survivor and writer Imre Kertész, who, if my memory serves, won the Nobel Prize for Literature. Anyway, that's it. Thank you. Good food for thought, especially thinking back to Fein's last sentence here. We can study and we can learn, but in the end, all that we know for certain is that the battle against dehumanization must be waged every day, everywhere. Thank you, Leonard Fein. The fight for justice, human rights, dignity continues on worldwide. As I tell student audiences, when you hear about injustice, whether it's in your home, neighborhood, district, miles or hundreds of miles away, it could be another part of your country and another part of the world, don't be silent. The Holocaust did not have to happen. Same thing with other genocides. Silence enables genocide, hate, and hate crimes. Thank you. Be safe, everybody. All right.